Hey guys, I'm making this video in response to a great comment on one of my short videos where I quoted Eddie Futch saying styles make fights, and I referenced how he trained the two guys that beat Ali in Ali's prime, or closest to his prime. That was of course Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, and then both of those guys got destroyed by George Foreman. And then of course when Foreman fought Ali, you would think, based off of the fact that he destroyed two guys that gave Ali trouble, that he would destroy Ali as well. But of course that wasn't the case. Ali stopped him. And that's a representation of how styles make fights, and we're going to dive deep into that. Now with Frazier and Norton, both of those guys, what they did have in common stylistically that gave Ali trouble stylistically is that they were both able to be pressure fighters, and they were both a little bit lower than Ali. They fought a little bit lower position, so therefore, meaning height-wise, that gave Ali some trouble for a few different reasons. Now, although they did adopt some different nuances with that style, and that's where I'm gonna talk about a little bit more about styles and how styles make fights and give more context and description to that. With Frazier, like I said, so pressure was a style to give Ali trouble, and then also being a little bit shorter. But then as far as nuances go, because remember, Eddie Futch trained Joe Frazier and Ken Norton for their winning performances against Ali. With Frazier, the goal was, of course, to land his great left hook and focus on the erratic head movement. The way that Eddie Futch described it was to move your head as unpredictably as when you hit a speed bag off center, right? Or off timing. It goes erratically. So that's one of the keys to Frazier's style, but also one of the keys to him giving Ali a lot of trouble, along with the pressure and being a little bit lower. With Norton, though, it was a little bit different. It was to use the jab, and to really jab when Ali jabbed, because Ali wouldn't really catch jabs or anything else. He would lean out, he'd use his feet, things like that. So that's where when you watch that fight, you see Norton with his right hand in front of his face, and he's looking to time Ali's jab counter afterwards or right before it. He said that he could see a little flex in the pec, I think he said, that would be a tell that he knew Ali was about to jab. And that was his keys to victory, along with pressure and cutting off the ring. Again, also stylistically, Frazier and Norton both could cut off the ring on Ali, which is a recipe to beat someone with the style, or is similar stylistically to Ali. Now, what's interesting is that you look at Foreman. There's another fighter that Ali beat that is similar to Foreman before he ever faced Foreman. Of course, that was Sonny Liston. If I remember correctly, I think Foreman actually trained in the same gym as Liston for a period of time. So what do they have in common? Okay, because you would know going into of course, Ali won the heavyweight title by beating Sonny Liston, beating him twice. The first time Liston retired in the fight, and then the second time was a controversial stoppage, but it was a legitimate stoppage, and we can get into that in another video. So he beat that style of a little bit more long power puncher slugger type. All right, Liston, and Foreman both, they do have some technique and things like that, but their shots are a little bit wider. Their arms are longer than like a Frazier or a Norton. They fight a little bit more straight up in comparison to Frazier and Norton. And so that lends itself to be a little bit different. They were both not shorter, they had longer arms, both were not as good at that constant pressure and cutting off the ring, and both were very hittable. Again, I'm not trying to say that like Frazier and Norton were not hittable. Probably Frazier was more hittable than Norton, but both Liston and Foreman were hittable. And that obviously comes into play against a fast boxer like Ali. They weren't really excellent at cutting down the ring. Definitely Liston was not. So with Foreman versus Frazier and Norton, now why did Foreman give them trouble? And that's where actually I want to throw someone else into the mix here, because I'm mentioning Liston as well. Just to illustrate my point about styles. Liston, similar style to Foreman, right? Both power punchers and not short and stocky guys. Liston destroyed Floyd Patterson in 2 fights, similar to how Foreman destroyed Joe Frazier. Now, of course, again, to compare, when Patterson fought Ali, it was more competitive. Ali did, of course, beat him, and it was not, as competitive as the Frazier fights at all, but Patterson had more of a chance. And again, that goes in styles makes fights. Patterson's a little bit of a lower fighter, fighting out of a crowd, shorter, more based off of head movement. And you see how that style did not match up well against Liston, got destroyed by Liston. And then that style with Frazier did not match up well against Foreman either. So that style nullified that style. Now, going into Foreman versus Frazier and Norton, right? So Norton had trouble with power punchers. So that's one thing just to keep in mind that made it trouble. But both Norton and Frazier were not very good at fighting on the way back. All right, they fought forward a lot, and they weren't necessarily a style, of course, like an Ali or a Sugar Ray Robinson, where they could fight moving back and off to the side. They weren't super inept at that. And then also as well, through doing some review to kind of brush up, because it's been a long time since I've studied a lot of these fights, in both fights with Foreman against Frazier and Norton, Foreman did utilize some body shots and, of course, the uppercut, where Ali didn't utilize a lot of uppercuts and absolutely, I think, almost zero body shots. It's hard for me to say that, but I want to say almost zero body shots. And of course, Ali's not the power puncher. He has some power on his punches, but not the power puncher that Foreman is. So putting those things together, the body shots, big point there, and the power punching, and Foreman pushing both of those men back when they're not used to being the ones pushed back. They want to be the aggressor. If you allow them to be the aggressor, they get to fight their style. So him taking that away from them is what led to the results of him just utterly destroying them. And again, same thing goes with the Liston and Patterson situation, where Liston forced Patterson back, did a great job of mixing uppercuts and some hard body punches, because it only takes a couple hard body punches against that type of style of bobbing and weaving to shut them down sometimes and straighten them out. And then also a couple times, like with the Patterson fight, Patterson actually drops down with his head and basically drops it into a body shot. And then also just another nuanced point as well with the peekaboo style of Patterson with the hands on the face and really not being completely in control of blocking and catching punches. Liston just really blasted through the guard and smashed his own hands into his face and things like that. Now, what played into Liston's loss to Ali? All right, so because again, you're thinking about styles, right? So Liston, Foreman type style, kind of mid-longer range, power puncher, slugger type guy against a boxer mover like Ali. So what played into Liston's loss to Ali? Liston couldn't cut down the ring at all, right? If you watch those fights, like the first one, and you just fast forward it, you'll see a lot of times Ali just moves to Ali's left and Liston jabs in a little bit off to Liston's own left side. So he's never there to meet Ali and give him actually proper pressure. And that allows Ali to dance and fight his style of fight. When Frazier fought Ali and when Norton fought Ali, they were able to cut the ring down, and that can nullify that mover boxer style. All right. What played into Foreman's loss was style. So again, I talked about how Liston had trouble against Ali. It was style, but it was also a really bad game plan and strategy. Not blaming his coach Archie Moore, former great light heavyweight champion with I think the most knockouts of anybody in the history of boxing. Not Archie Moore's fault. From my understanding, and if I remember correctly, it was either Foreman's cousin or something like that, maybe his brother, who got it in Foreman's head that, hey, you just need to push Ali back, get him on the ropes, and just pound on him non-stop. And that does make a little bit of sense, but not in the context of Ali, because that can work against a boxer mover who doesn't have the exact nuance of Ali. So with Ali, a little bit how I classify him, like I tell a lot of people, is he's really almost a brawler in a lot of ways. So he's a boxer mover brawler, right? Now I know that sounds really weird, it doesn't make much sense, but let me try to flesh it out for you. So, as we all know, with the stories about Ali, supposedly got his jaw broken in the fight with Ken Norton and fought on many rounds. He says he broke it in the second round. So inhumanly tough. He, of course, would just absorb body punches from people. And then, of course, in sparring, Larry Holmes famously said, Larry Holmes was Ali's sparring partner throughout a lot of Ali's career, that Ali would let Larry hit him in the body and just pound on the body to condition his body. But then he said he would see him urinate blood and things like that. So Ali was a little bit like a brawler in the sense that he was just insanely tough. He wasn't your standard boxer, mover that isn't willing to absorb punishment. There's a lot of guys like that in the history of boxing and currently where, like, yes, they're tough, they're not sissies, but they really don't like getting hit, and it makes them feel uncomfortable, and they're not willing to absorb. Where Ali, unfortunately for Ali's sake, very sad, was willing to absorb those punches and was inhumanly tough. And so that adds another shade to the style that makes it so trying to just keep Ali on the rope and pound on him non-stop and just try to brawl him out of there isn't really going to work. All right, because Ali, you almost couldn't kill him in the ring, especially before he just went completely over the edge. So that's what played into that, which of course played right into Ali's rope-a-dope strategy, which, if I remember correctly, or tell me if you think of another example, but it was the only time in the history of boxing that rope-a-dope worked, right? So if you can give me another example, give it to me. But that's the only time it worked. And it only worked because Foreman had a very, very preschool approach to it and simplistic approach that didn't have any adjustment to it when it wasn't working. And Ali had the toughness and everything else and just absorbed it and almost let Foreman punch himself out. And of course, as well, Ali had the advantage of just his experience in the ring and everything else. So to wrap up, styles make fights, and to completely flesh out what I mean by styles is that when you're thinking of style, don't think of it's a box, right? Or a specific category, right? Like a color. It's not, red, white, blue, pink. It's a spectrum. Every fighter has little nuances, little things that are different, and different amounts of certain styles in their toolbox and in their repertoire. And so again, to my point, you have some guys that are just pure boxer movers and they don't have the brawler orientation that Ali had or developed. You have guys that are pressure fighters, but it's a very different pressure fighter with let's say a Chavez, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. and a Joe Frazier, or a Mike Tyson, or even let's say a Gervonta Davis when he is applying the pressure, or just whoever. So there's a lot of nuance with a pressure fighter that again makes it a spectrum, and they're gonna have pieces there and they're not gonna have other pieces there. So let me give you an example too, because somebody can be okay, check it out. When you think of styles, right? Think about different categories you might be thinking of, right? Or labels for it. You think of, they're a counterpuncher, right? Who comes to mind right away? Right? You think of maybe Floyd Mayweather. You think of maybe perhaps James Toney, people like that. And you think of almost Floyd Mayweather in his later years of being conservative, sitting back and looking to counter solely. But you'd be neglecting and forgetting about the nuance that a lot of pressure fighters are actually really good counter punchers, because most all of the knockouts in boxing are a counter punch, right? It's throwing a punch while someone else is throwing a punch. And if you don't believe me, go through the repertoire, and it's not just someone going out there and just leading with one shot. It might be that for the very finish sometimes, but more often than not, they were throwing inside of other punches or countering a punch that at least set the stage for the knockout or was the knockout. Because that adage, which is so common but it's so true, is that the punch you don't see is the punch that hurts. And obviously a good counter is hard to see. So just think about how that plays into the nuance, but you can have some overarching themes, again, like I'm listing through here, and that is where the late 60s and 70s were they're known as the golden era for heavyweights, because we get a great sample of all these different fighters and the different kind of categories or loose categories of styles that they fall into and how those styles match up. And of course, one thing that's beautiful about heavyweights, like I was telling one of my fighters a couple weeks ago, is that they're bigger. So even though their skill base is not quite as high sometimes as the lighter guys, you get to see things a little bit better. And so it's a great case study on different styles and how they interact with each other, and how you can have all these different fighters and one fighter will beat one fighter, but then that same fighter will beat someone else that maybe beat the first fighter. It's really interesting to see. And again, that's where boxing is far more of an art than it is a pure science. Just like art, you are operating in the realm of physics, right? Because if you're a musician, you're dealing with vibrations. If you're painting, you're dealing with gravity and things of that nature. But it's very subjective, and it's very open, and it's very chaotic, and there's so many variables. And that's what makes boxing so special though too, is that no fight is ever the same, right? You can't fight the same fight twice. If you like this video, make sure you click like, subscribe. Hit me up with a comment as well if you have any thoughts about what I talked about or any questions, and I'll see you for the next one.